parents and in a one-on-one situation with each one of the students. More recently, I've moved to a school called Wallamai College, also in the west of Sydney, in the far west of Sydney, and it's a much newer school. And now I've moved to Melbourne and I'm a bit more involved with tertiary students. I'd written a book called Parenting for Character in 2005, which is really a summary of a lot of the work that we were doing with parents and a summary of many of the strategies. And that's been picked up by a number of other countries that have done their own editions. So it's got some universal appeal. It's a major topic. I like talking about what ancient writers had to say about parenting, because it shows that the wisdom we're talking about is not just my opinion. There's a timeless expertise in raising children that we need to tap into. Probably the biggest single authority that I would draw on is a guy called Aristotle, who's like 2,500 years ago, 2,400 years ago. But what he wrote about parenting is amazingly still very relevant. He was the person who really insisted that if we don't raise children with good habits, then we let them down. And remember, in our society, we talk about values. We don't talk about virtues, but virtues are good habits. Values aren't quite the same as virtues. You can have the value of getting up in the morning, but you still hit the snooze button. If you've got the virtue, you actually hop up when the alarm goes. Interesting. More recently, I've done a doctorate in the neuroscience of character, so in how virtues are supported in the brain. So I'll bring a little bit of that into play here this evening. The other major factor in my life and in the input I'll be giving you tonight is St. Josemaria Escriva. St. Josemaria was the big inspiration behind the two schools in Sydney that I've been involved in. And I want you to look really carefully. Can you see the guy in the blue hat? Just there? Just there. I know that's me because the sun moved across us during the canonisation. There were 500,000 people down to the Tiber. It was just marvellous. It was a beautiful, beautiful day. But St. Josemaria insisted that parents need to roll their sleeves up and they need to create environments where they can be the decisive influence in the life of their children. It's your privilege to be the decisive influence on your children, but you need to be that, because if you don't work to be that, somebody else or something else or Bart Simpson will be. Big issue. Big problem. There's a danger, isn't there, that sort of Homer Simpson could be the most influential father of our age if we don't do something to get ourselves on the board, to be in the game. We've talked about the program, and I will break for a break in the middle. My mistake when I put that together. I would suggest that as we go, just note, either physically or up here or on your phone, a couple of points that you think are going to be useful for you in your family. You've got strengths in your family. There's no family that's perfect. Everybody can benefit from other people's experience and approaches. So I'm hoping that as we go on tonight, you'll be able to pick up one or two ideas, go home, talk about them together with your better half, if your better half is there at home, and make a few resolutions. What I'm saying, there's a wisdom about raising kids that, you know, of course, if for whatever reason you happen to be on your own, these ideas are applicable. But there's certainly a wisdom in talking it over and having a very combined approach if mum and dad are together at home. And do everything you can to be united. The value of tonight will be shown not in you walk out satisfied. Yes, that was a reasonable way to spend a Tuesday night, or the supper was good, or thank goodness that's over. But whether in 6 months' time or in a year's time, the one or two ideas that you picked out have made a difference in your family life and in the way you're raising your kids. So we're really parenting for the long haul here. We're not taking the approach of how to make kids happy. We can take them to McDonald's. We're not aiming to do that. What we want to do is equip children with the strengths they will need in life. I like those two quotes. They come from educators from overseas. Rafael Pick actually has some runs on the board. He's a father of 16.
Whoa.
I've been to dinner in his house. He has this, he's passed away now, but he had this monstrous round table that he could fit 18 people around, and the world's largest Lazy Susan in the middle. It was just great. And he says, we must raise young men and women who can solve their own problems in life. It's getting back to the idea of being your own ruler. And if we raise If we raise children who get knocked over by the environment, that's our problem. It was our duty to raise them so that they didn't get knocked over. So it's a big task. Jim Stenson is an educator from America, principal of a number of schools, founding principal of a number of schools. And he emphasises the idea of being able to care for others as a measure of whether or not you're grown up. And there's a lot of wisdom in that, because certainly even philosophy has moved in the direction of relationships and understanding the importance of relationships to human beings, and how intrinsic it is to us to need to care for others. And certainly that's a measure of maturity. Do we have a crisis in parenting? Maybe not on a universal scale, but you'd have to say that there are some cracks. You'd have to say that there are issues with the way that young people and their parents relate to each other. How is it possible that we've got a generation of young people who are probably more likely to say something on Facebook to people that they've hardly met than they would to their own parents? What does that tell us about the connection that parents have with their own kids sometimes? So a major take-home message tonight is, what can you do to be very close to your kids, to be in the game, so that your children open their hearts to you? You can't prize your way into the life of a teenager. Your son or daughter has to open his or her heart to you. They have to tell you what's on their mind, what their challenges are. And if you haven't raised them to do that, then it's harder. So the work you do when they're tiny, to be very open with you, and your openness with them is very important. I don't need to talk about the sort of sexual mores of our society. You know, there was this horrific study that came out of the a cross-parliamentary study in 2012 in the UK, and it found that 80% of 16-year-olds in the UK access pornography regularly. Now, what's that going to do to the next generation? Certainly that number is considerably higher than some roughly equivalent survey 5 or 6 years before. And most access through their smartphones. So, you know, when you're putting a smartphone in a young person's hands, what do you do to fortify them? To protect them? And what do you do also to teach them to protect themselves, because they have to protect themselves. But if you just put a gun in a person's hand and expect them to know how to use it, they might not know how to use it. A lot of work needs to go in the background. And lots of other issues. Where, you know, think if you wanted to put the 90 billion people in the history of mankind who've lived, right? Think of a pyramid. We're right at the very top, aren't we, in terms of affluence, in terms of comfort, in terms of security, in terms of a whole string of things. So we're very privileged, but it gives us a platform to do things with our kids that maybe in other cultures they haven't had time to do or whatever. But do we take full advantage of it, or do we amuse ourselves? We really have to focus on our duties with the kids. And the last point I raised there is about the need to avoid a cycle of parenting habits developing. A friend of mine said to me, a young couple, the lady said to me, and she said this openly in front of her husband, she said, "When my husband gets angry, I tense up because I see in him his father's anger." So we can create cycles where we live out the mistakes our own parents made. So we've got to think this through, identify the term family of origin is a term that Byron and Francine Paroli use, but we've got to identify our family of origin and work out what am I going to take and what am I going to leave behind. And it's a healthy thing to refine the process as we go. I'd say you have two major tasks. One is to be the decisive input in a child who is wired to learn. So, but you need to be the decisive input, because there's many other forces on the seesaw, if you like. And the second goal there really is to ensure that your child has the strengths to manage their own lives. And those good habits we'll keep coming back to, and the second half of this presentation will be on suggestions about fostering virtue in the young people in your care. I like that. Isn't that a great photo? Did you see the photo in the news a couple of weeks ago of the shark surfing with the guy, following him in the wave? So The things we have to watch on the inside, obviously, you're trying to develop habits. You've got to work out what's the predominant temperament in your son or daughter. Because each temperament brings its strengths and weaknesses. If a person has a really dominant temperament, then maybe you have to help them modify that so they pay more attention to others. If they have a shy temperament, they have to be assertive, otherwise they will get rolled. It's very important. And on the outside, you've got to also be conscious of the other influences coming into the life of your children. I'd like to talk about that. Those two terms come from Aristotle. He talks about how your job as a parent is to make sure you train children in really basic motivations. Remember, what motivates us in life is, the raw material of motivation is avoiding difficulty and in pursuing things that we enjoy. That's the raw material. But if a person goes through life like that, they will get themselves in a lot of trouble. So your job is to help your children with your own direction, teach them that yes, they have to say no to themselves sometimes, and they have to manage their fears. They just can't give in to their fears. It's easier to teach this to a tiny child. We've got a lot of teenagers who have problems coping with their fears and their anxieties. Why is this? They need to learn those skills when they're younger. And they need to say no to themselves when they're older because you have said no to them when they're younger. Aristotle says if a child obeys his parents or her parents when they say no when they're small, later they can say no to themselves. Very interesting. I've got a lot of people who can't say no to themselves. That idea of motivations is big, right? I do keep coming back to this, and it's got a lot of grounding in the neuroscience, that very clearly our emotions drive our actions. The things we like, we do. The things we think about are the things we like. Are you raising your children so that they love what is good, true and beautiful, and that's what they pursue? Or do you allow your kids to be attracted by MTV, by whatever? And in the end, they're the things that they value. Now, it doesn't mean you're taking them to the art gallery every weekend, but what can we do so that the things that really move the heart of your children are beautiful and true and good? Or do you let them accept cheap substitutes, Dolly magazine or something? What are the things that you look for to move your children's hearts? Family, affection, is that very big? How do they know that family and affection is very big? Because when you walk in the door at night after you've been at work all day, dads, your face lights up when you see your family. You have to light up because your family is the most beautiful thing in your life and your faith. And if our family and our faith doesn't make us light up and be very happy and joyful, what sort of example are we to the kids? How can we get more enthusiastic about golf on Saturday than we are about walking in the door to see our family? It's a big issue. So this 200 square centimetres, you as a parent, you're responsible to manage this 200 square centimetres. Nobody else is responsible for the atmosphere in your home. And remember, the atmosphere in your home teaches your kids what is important, what is of value in life. So you have to manage that, because if you don't manage that, if you get stressed out at the wrong time. We did a survey at Redfield of the students in secondary, and we invited them to talk about what were the best moments to communicate with mum, best moments to communicate with dad, and so on. And we reported back on this to the parents. And up until about 13 or 14 years of age, the students blamed themselves if mum or dad were stressed or cranky. But after that, they blamed their parents for not having self-control. They see through it. And of course, what we end up doing is